see everybody here. Some of you I know, others of you I don't, but hopefully I'll get to know you more during this hour. So by way of introduction, my name is Doug Dransfield, and I'm privileged to facilitate this Zoom discussion group. I'm a father and a grandfather, a retired pediatrician, and a member of PSR Maine. Physicians for Social Responsibility started in 1962 to educate the public that there's no adequate medical response to using a nuclear weapon, and that, like any other incurable disease, the answer is prevention. The movie Oppenheimer, which stimulated us to have this Zoom, shows how one man led the creation of the atomic bomb and failed to prevent the growing threat of nuclear war and the actual damage done to people then and the continued damage done to the present. Today, we will not discuss Oppenheimer the man or the movie per se, but rather the world we've all lived in since that time. Two people are going to start the discussion. Midori Morrow is an artist and activist, and her grandmother was a Nagasaki hibakusha. Her grandmother died from radiation-related cancer when Midori was 9. And Midori's art creation, 2,260 Portraits of My Grandmother Ruko, shows the immediate and lasting effects of Oppenheimer's creation. Second presentation will be by Doug Rawlings, who's a combat veteran of the Vietnam War, a founding member of Veterans for Peace, a poet and an activist. And he will share Veterans for Peace's belief that continued preparation for war and modernization of the U.S. nuclear arsenal harms us all. Then we'll begin to have a group discussion. And I urge you all to ask questions and to offer comments. If you choose to write something, look down at the bottom of your screen and you'll see the chat option. And you can write your comments in there. And if you would like to speak and discuss things with people verbally, in the reactions button down below, if you click on that, you'll see a raise your hand feature. If you raise your hand, we'll call on you sequentially to join the discussion. You're all muted right now automatically, and you'll need to unmute yourself when you choose to make your comments. And then finally, during the discussion, Dr. Peter Wilk will tell how many members of organizations in Maine are working together to educate the public and elected officials about the damage done by nuclear weapons. And that working group we call Mainers for Ending Nuclear Danger, or MEND. And our work primarily focuses on promoting Back from the Brink. And he'll discuss with us all the current status of preventing the development and use of nuclear weapons and what we can do immediately and in the long term to continue that work. All right, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Midori to present her art. And thank you, Midori.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me. Just going to share my screen. Okay. Does everyone see? Okay. Hi, my name is Midori Morrow, and my grandmother was hibakusha, and I'm a third-generation hibakusha. I'm a photographic multimedia artist, an Asian American, and an advocate for nuclear peace. I'm currently based in Portland, Maine, attending the Maine College of Art and Design, getting my Master's of Fine Arts. And I'm very honored to be here with you today. My grandmother, Ruko, was a little girl when the first bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Japan. She lived in the city of Nagasaki, and her father owned a construction business and her grandmother owned a tobacco store. When Japan was warned of a second attack, Ruko was evacuated to the outskirts of Nagasaki City. They took shelter in time for the second bomb to be dropped. Her mother got radiation sickness and died after the blast, and her father was severely burned. While Ruko survived the bombings, her family remained in Nagasaki for the rest of her childhood, and she recounted stories of this to my father. Ones where her father's business was destroyed, so their livelihood was gone, and their source of food consisted of making bread with the grass that grew around the city. They had to rebuild their lives from the ground up. Later in life, she would meet my grandfather, David Morrow, who was serving in the United States Air Force and stationed in Yokohama, Japan. They married and moved back to the United States and settled in Oregon. As her life went on, Ruko had long-lasting health effects from the nuclear radiation, and for as long as I knew her, she had cancer. which she would later pass away from when I was around 9 or 10 years old. When I was 14, I was in high school in a world history class. It was the end of our World War II unit, and we talked about what had ended the war. I sat there while my teacher described the reasons for the droppings of the bombs. Japan would not surrender. It was a means to an end. We saved more lives than we took. 10 years later, I can see that the end cannot justify the means if there is never truly an end. The war may have ended, but the nuclear age had just begun. This piece here is titled 2,260 Portraits of My Grandmother Ruko, and it consists of 2,260 cyanotype portraits of my grandmother. On top of the images lays a diary entry of myself when I was 14 years old. And it reads, I remember the debate I was forced to have in history class on whether or not I would have chosen to drop the atomic bomb. My answer immediately being no shocked my classmates. My teacher prompted me to think of the different sides of the story, but that was the thing. At the very core of me was both sides. I thought to myself, how can these people sit here debating on the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, my people? How could they sit here acting as if this event was so far in the past when my own grandmother was a living, breathing reminder? The bell rang and we all left for lunch, and the ayes had it. They had all voted yes. It was one of those moments I will never forget. For my classmates, the decision was a no-brainer. You sacrificed the lives of another nation in order to save your own. After that bell rang, they all got to walk away from their decision. They are part of a system that is teaching them that it does no wrong. This opened my eyes to the reality of how the bombs are taught in America. It is reduced down to death statistics and a means to end a war, to save American lives. An event that caused the deaths of my family was taught to my counterparts as what had potentially saved theirs. The story of my grandmother informs the artwork that I make. While I'm creating work that extends to other topics under nuclear disarmament, the memory of Ruko lives on in the art that I put out into the world. I made this work because I want people to see her, for just a moment of their day to exist with her, to understand what happened to her, and see that she kept moving forward despite everything. Now this piece is titled, Though You Cannot See It, It Lives Within Me, consisting of hanging rice paper prints of dirt, sand, and water, looming over hand-drawn topographical maps of all atomic bomb testing sites in the world. I am commenting on nuclear fallout and how it gets thrown up into the atmosphere, circles around for years, and falls back to the earth by rain. It falls onto all parts of the earth. I made this piece so that people who view it can think about how radiation is a threat that also looms over them. They cannot escape it. We are all connected, and therefore we must all work together in the fight for nuclear disarmament. We are risking great danger here. The danger of forgetting puts us at risk of repeating. And I know that my role as an artist and a descendant of Habakusha is to ensure that people do not forget, so that we do not repeat the horrors of August 1945. I would also like to acknowledge my role as an Asian American growing up in a country that inflicted so much pain on my family. It makes the work I do that much more important, because both sides live within my blood. This self-portrait was taken in Nagasaki, Japan, this year. It was created at 11:02 a.m., August 9th, 2023, exactly to the minute, 78 years after the bomb was dropped in Nagasaki. Because of a typhoon hitting Japan, I commemorated this anniversary alone. But I now share this portrait with you all, so that you too can take a moment to remember the Hibakusha and what happened to them in August of 1945. This past August, I attended the World Conference Against Atomic and Hydrogen Bombs in Japan. I was able to speak with many of the attendees about the movie Oppenheimer that just came out in the US. And I would like, very quickly, just for a moment, to speak on where I stand on the movie being created. I do not deny that the movie is helping to bring the conversation surrounding nuclear power back into the mainstream. But I would like to express my sadness that the movie did not once show the people of Japan and the impact of the bomb on its citizens. I understand that the movie was portraying what it was like in the United States after the bombs were dropped, and that there was quite a lot of information not released to the public. However, it also felt as if at the same time, the erasure of the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was being upheld. I did not see the faces of the Japanese people. Instead, I watched the smiling faces of the scientists witnessing a blast that would days later massacre hundreds of thousands of people. Instead, our path forward should be keeping the stories of the Hibakusha alive, to ensure that their voices do not die out and become silent. This can be done by listening to the voices of second and third generation Hibakusha, as well as listening to those affected by nuclear power plant disasters, and the people of all of the Marshall Islands and all over testing sites around the globe. There are countless ways to uplift the voices of the Hibakusha. For me, the path forward is to continue to create artwork that can begin these conversations about the peace movement. And I will also share the story that has been passed down within my family. Through storytelling, educating younger generations on the peace movement, and of course through art. These should be our focus. Art is an amazing tool that serves the purpose of uniting all people. It truly brings us all together through the most human form of communication. Art can transcend language and draw in the people in order to begin the conversation of nuclear peace. My grandmother died before seeing the abolition of nuclear weapons. However, she lives on within me and within my art, and I hope that one day she will see nuclear peace through my eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Midori.
Thank you, Midori. And Doug, why don't you follow up with your next presentation, please?
Yeah, thank you, Midori, for that. That's, again, another indication of the power of art in politics, and also the power of your own personal witness, which I greatly appreciate. I saw the 3-hour extravaganza on the life and times of Dr. Oppenheimer, and I was impressed by the scope of the movie as a character sketch and analysis, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, a blockbuster expose of the real story behind the making of the atomic bomb. Sure, I sympathized with the main character as he struggled through the unseemly marriage of the scientific world and the military world. Welcome to the Green Machine, I thought, as I watched him slowly succumb to the demands of the generals and war hawks and supposedly well-informed intelligence branch of the Pentagon. This truly is a movie that captures the perils of getting caught up in the fantasies and machinations of those in real power in this country. But it wasn't the really important story as far as I'm concerned. It barely mentioned the plight of the citizens of Hiroshima or Nagasaki. No wonder that the film is not being shown in Japan. Okay, I can be accused of being yet another critic of a piece of art that doesn't reach my preconceived expectations. Is there an alternative? Yes, there is. Veterans for Peace just completed its 38th annual convention, which was dedicated to the legacy of Daniel Ellsberg, a member of Veterans for Peace who just died at the age of 92. He was 25 years younger than Dr. Oppenheimer, but close enough in age to be considered perhaps a kind of younger brother. Ellsberg was also enamored with the military and worked closely with the war hawks as a member of the Marines, and then as a consultant to the Rand Corporation during the early years of the Vietnam War. But then he made a move that Oppenheimer refused to do. He took a moral stance, and then a political stance, and then became our country's most well-respected anti-war activist, continuing to his dying day to resist the development of our country's nuclear arsenal. Please join me in listening to this next 5-minute elegy to Daniel Ellsberg that concluded Veterans for Peace's 2023 convention. It comes from Kathy Kelly's remarks, and then she makes a reference to Caitlin Johnstone. So with all due respect to Dr. Oppenheimer, here are the footsteps we should follow.
Daniel Ellsberg, presente.
Thank you for your service. I say this not to the employees of the war machine, who in truth serve nothing besides imperial domination and the profit margins of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. I say this to the peacemakers. to the truth tellers, to the defiant ones, to those who've shone the light of truth upon the blood-spattered face of the empire against their own interests for the benefit of everyone. To those who've stared down the barrel of the most powerful military force ever assembled and said, "Do your worst." To the grandparents who've been dragged from nuclear weapons protests in handcuffs to create a safer world for their grandchildren. To the activists whose incurable disobedience has led them to disrupt empire managers at think tank conferences or paint "No War" across the face of the Sydney Opera House. To the selfless martyrs who've exposed the abuses of the machine, knowing full well that the scales of justice are weighted heavily against them. To the hero in Belmarsh, to the Pentagon Papers whistleblower who today closed his gentle, loving eyes for a final time. Thank you for your service, for serving the highest interest over your own, for pouring everything you've got into the hope for a better tomorrow, for betting everything on the hope of a healthy and harmonious world, for creating a guiding light to help humanity steer its way home, for seizing your moment to help make things right instead of letting it pass like everyone around you, for somehow finding the strength to swim against the current when it would be so much easier to drift along with the madness, for somehow finding a higher calling in this wildly dysfunctional society where everything is pointed at selfishness and meaninglessness, for somehow cultivating something profound and authentic within yourself in the midst of a civilization of the vapid and fraudulent, for doing your very best to get a foot on the brake pedal when everything else is accelerating toward the cliff's edge, for listening to that small voice within which can tolerate no more, for turning around, for taking your stand, for finding the courage, for doing what is right, for putting truth first, for lighting the way. Thank you for your service. We will do our best to carry the torch forward and finish what you began.
Truly a great man whose legacy will continue on for as long as many of us on this call will do the work that we're doing. So thank you all.
Thank you, Doug. Very moving tribute to Daniel, and I think it is a tribute to everyone that's in this meeting. I know many of you have spent many years following in Daniel Ellsberg's footsteps, and we can only hope to continue to do that. Both you and Midori raised some interesting points about the movie. You've also raised many wonderful things for us to think about. Midori, your presentation, your own life story, your grandmother's life story, so moving. And the second art object, the radiation maps that you created, those are, again, great art, really very profound way to think about it and try to visualize what's happened to all of us. I know probably everybody in this Zoom has some cesium still from the nuclear testing somewhere in our bodies. So with that, I'd like to open it up to have people make comments either about what they've heard just now or things that they'd like to say in reference to the movie or the anti-nuclear work in general. Before I turn it over completely, I want to thank Martha Spees for introducing me to Midori and for having Midori, she facilitated her joining us. And Martha, thank you very much for that. As always, you've added greatly to our work. Okay, open for comments. You either can write something in the chat down below or unmute yourself and raise your hand, and we'll try to get you on board. Don't see any immediate comments. Okay, John, Rabbi.
Yes. Hello. And thanks to Martha as well. She's my partner in Peace Action Maine. I consider her my boss in that outfit. Anyway, here's a story for you. I think the film is a very good commentary on how easily people can talk themselves into doing horrible things. And I think, despite its limits, it's an eerily precise reflection of the folks who are doing our war planning today. Now, along those lines, ICANN has published something called Schools of Mass Destruction, which lists colleges and universities that are involved in nuclear weapons research. So here's a little story. My own undergraduate college, Stanford, is on that list. So I wrote the president, told him that I would stop donating to the university until it stopped such research. Whereupon I got a reply from its head of alumni relations, who said that Stanford was not involved in such research because it was classified. So I went back to the ICANN website, and lo and behold, Stanford was still on that list. So there's some interesting twists and turns in that respect. So if you see your college and university on that list, I encourage you to stop donating until they drop all such activity or investment in the war machine. Thanks very much for your time.
I'm Suzanne Hedrick. May I say something? I can't raise my hand, it won't be seen. Hello?
You're muted, Doug.
Hello?
Sorry, that rookie mistake. Suzanne, please start, and then we'll get to Erica Frank.
Hello?
Hello, Suzanne Henrik?
Yes.
Go ahead,
I was,
please. Go ahead, please.
okay, I was born the same year as Daniel Ellsberg. I'm 92 years old. I was 14 years old when the bomb was dropped over Hiroshima. I just graduated from the 8th grade. My dad and brothers were in the war, D-Day invasion, and they brought home pamphlets that they had received what to do to guard themselves against radiation burns. Just turn your back and close your eyes and so forth and so on. And when I saw the Oppenheimer film, I was reminded of that when these people in the area. Also, I taught outside of Philadelphia during the Cuban Missile Crisis and had to lead children into the hallway to duck and cover against a possible nuclear bomb. And also in the county I lived in, Bristol County in Pennsylvania, people were putting in bomb shelters and threatening to shoot anybody who tried to get in, which I wondered. And then in 1982, I was in New York City at the big anti-nuclear march and hooked arms with 2 Hibachi women who flew in from Hiroshima, who had been survivors of the Hiroshima bomb. So I've long been an opponent. I remember in Bristol, Pennsylvania, they had a missile silo up on the ground and head off to the missile site to see this latest outrage. That's the end of my conversation.
Hi, y'all.
Okay, now, Dr. Frank, please.
Hi, great to be with you guys. So two pieces that I think 2023 will be remembered for IPPNW globally. One is a missed opportunity, which is I wish that we'd had the organization that would have allowed us to tie into every showing of Oppenheimer around the world. And I when I went, I took my AirSots 1990 medallion copy of the Nobel Peace Prize that Mary Wynn entrusted me with, and I took it to the screening, and I just got up before and said, introduced myself and said, come join me afterwards if you want to talk more about this. So that's one missed opportunity, but there's an even bigger opportunity that I think is in front of us, which is now for the first time in 37 years, our Nobel Peace Prize has been liberated from Bernie Lowndes' personal safe deposit box. And I think that we organizationally have an opportunity to leverage this. And I've been talking with some folks on this call, I think have been on CC'd on some of this, but with Ira and Michael and Chuck and others in IPPNW globally and nationally in Canada, that the 2019 Literature Nobel Prize was auctioned recently for over $100 million to raise funds for kids in Ukraine. And we have the opportunity right now as leaders in this movement to leverage this asset finally to be able to take our movement to a whole different plane in terms of our efficacy. And to me, the best way to honor Daniel and our other founding parents is to make sure that we collectively ensure that we don't miss this transformative opportunity for the movement to be able to really finally make change. Thanks.
Well, thank you. That's a very interesting idea. Can I ask you just to follow up with who has actual ownership of the prize?
Sure. So I'm channeling Ira as best as I can here. So the language he used was that Bernie's family has returned the Peace Prize to IPPNW. I believe that the actual physical custodianship, I don't know if it still resides in Bernie's personal safe deposit box residua or if it's in IPPNW's hands. But the idea is that, yes, it is once more recognized as being the organization's object. And we are getting assessments from Christie's and Sotheby's about what kinds of monies they think we might be able to fetch. And then there will be, I will hopefully make sure of, but it doesn't seem like there's any resistance, and there will be some discussions about how we can best leverage this unprecedented and unrepeatable, well, I shouldn't say unrepeatable, we've now done it twice, but shouldn't count on a third one, tool of the Nobel Peace Prize. So.
Well, thank you very much. And Martha Spees reminds us that IPPNW stands for International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, just in case anybody didn't get the acronym. Kathy Burgoyne, Dr. Burgoyne, please.
Yes. Pardon my hyper acronym.
No. Don't apologize for anything.
Thank you, Dr. Frank. That was really nice to hear you talking about Bernie Lowndes. I actually have right behind me the University of Maine, which is where he was from. So he's dear to my heart, and I've been in this organization for many years. I just wanted to mention that we probably, in case there's anyone on the call who's not very familiar with it, maybe we should talk about the Back from the Brink resolution. That was a big part of my talk on Hiroshima Day. And I think those are areas we're working on with Angus King and others. Especially, he was particularly interested in the sole power of the president to launch a nuclear attack. And obviously that's still greatly on our minds with Trump potentially running again. So I wondered if people wanted to talk about that, if we wanted to run down through the 5 items, or if people wanted to talk about the Back from the Brink.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to ask Peter Wilk to speak now because he's nationally involved with Back from the Brink and has some information to share with all of us about things that are planned for this fall by that activity. Peter?
Thanks, Doug, and thanks, Kathy, for that perhaps not planned, but gracious segue. So first, just so to sort of refresh, some of you are involved with PSR or Veterans for Peace and or Peace Action, and sort of well know these 5 policies of the Back from the Brink statement. But let me just briefly restate them. Those are actively pursuing a verifiable agreement among nuclear armed states to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. Number 2, renouncing the option of using nuclear weapons first. Number 3, ending any president's unchecked authority to launch a nuclear attack. Number 4, taking U.S. nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert. And number 5, canceling the plan to completely replace the entire arsenal with enhanced weapons. So those are the 5 points that make up the sort of the Back from the Brink policy recommendations to reduce the threat of nuclear war and get us on a path to abolishing nuclear weapons. We have in Maine, well, let me back up for a minute and just share just personally, it was great, Midori, to hear your presentation, and Doug to see yet again that video tribute to Daniel Ellsberg. It's quite inspiring. And I think many of us will feel, as a result of this, sort of inspired to take some action of some sort. And there are some very simple things that we can do, or maybe some of them are a little harder than others, but still things that we can do right here in Maine. If you want to do something to live up to what, in a sense, both of our prior presenters were challenging us to do. And the first is to, in fact, work for building local support for these fundamental changes and demonstrating that through municipal resolutions, which is what Catherine was referring to. We've gotten 4 of these Back from the Brink resolutions adopted in Maine communities, over 70 of these adopted across the country. In Maine, we've gotten one through Portland, through Bangor, through the town of Hallowell, and most recently in South Portland. If any of you have any interest in helping us with this, please let us know via the chat function so that we can follow up with you, or if you need to think about it and then contact one of us so that we can strategize with you, what might be a way to go about it. If you know somebody who's on the city council in the community where you live, or even if you don't, might be a way that you could help with this. So that's one thing. The second thing is that there is coming up, all of you probably are familiar with the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, TPNW, and it is now ratified by many countries and has gone into effect in those countries. It is not yet operational in countries that have not ratified it, but the countries that have ratified it gather now annually. The first time they gathered in Vienna last year. This year they are gathering at the end of November at the UN in New York. And it's a fascinating dynamic because, of course, the US does not support this treaty, but they cannot prevent it being considered and having a rather public discussion of its merits at the UN November 27th through December 1st. It happens that there's a provision in these gatherings for observer countries to participate. So the US could send an observer delegation, and that is what we are trying to persuade the Biden administration to do. They don't have to agree with the treaty. They could take this opportunity to explain what their reservations are about this treaty. But we would like the Biden administration to actually step up and come send a delegation to the UN. It happens that several NATO countries actually did this in Vienna. I believe 5 or 6 of them did. So there is some precedent for it. To try to generate some pressure to encourage this, Back from the Brink nationally has created a letter to President Biden that we're trying to get as many local and state elected officials to sign on to, urging him to send these observers to to the treaty meeting, and also to begin some sort of multilateral negotiations with Russia, China, and other nuclear weapons possessing countries to establish some sort of time-bound framework for elimination of nuclear weapons. If the Biden administration doesn't think that TPNW is the best way to do it, they are free to propose some alternative mechanism for doing so. So any of you who happen to have a contact with any city councilor in the state, any mayor, elected official, could be actually county officials, please consider asking them to sign on to this letter. And Giselle is going to put in the chat, or maybe you already did, but you can put in the chat. There's a page on the National Back from the Brink website that has a whole lot of background information. It has the copies of the letter itself. And there's a sign-on form. We're not looking for, your individual signatures. We're looking for the signatures of these elected officials. And so they need to have this form, and it's online, and to sign on to it. Our goal is to have 50 signatures by the end of September. Back in 2021, we produced a similar letter and got over 300 signatures from elected officials in 41 states. We're trying to surpass that goal this time. So if you have any questions about that, we could talk about it here, or please contact me, send me an email, contact Doug, either of the Dougs, and we can take it from there. So thanks for joining on all that you do in each in your own way. And we can carry on this discussion either about this practical kind of set of suggestions, or any other ideas that you have about how to advance nuclear disarmament here in Maine.
Peter, Erica did put in the chat that it sounds like a remarkable Thanksgiving media opportunity for a side event, ?
Yeah, there are many events now planned in New York. Back from the Brink is really playing only a small part. We're sort of the supporting cheering team. The ICANN, which, as Erica, you well know, won the second Nobel Prize for its nuclear disarmament efforts, is the prime mover in convening a whole series of meetings during that week, starting on Sunday, the 26th. There's a gathering of ICANN, which is International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons campaigners. So Back from the Brink will be part of that. On Monday, there is actually a parliamentarians gathering. And so we're trying to get as many members of Congress as possible to go from Washington to New York and participate in that meeting. There will be parliamentarians, from legislators across the country, across the world, who will be coming into New York. Of course, they don't realize it's Thanksgiving, so that's why this got scheduled at that time. It's sort of an international meeting, and there are other events throughout the week. So if you have any interest, think about coming to New York to some of these events.
Great, Peter. Just one point, and then we'll get to Daniel Glover, and then to Doug Rawlings. Peter, if people say I was to write to my state representative, and she agreed to sign the letter, how should we report that back so that there's a tabulation of those?
Yeah, so if you go to the website, the link is in the chat, and we're going to also send out a follow-up email to everybody who are RSVP'd for this call, even those who didn't show up for it. And will be included in that is a link to this webpage. The webpage, in turn, and maybe we should make it more prominent, there is a particular form that state representative ought to sign. Okay. That's how they will fill it in, and we'll be able to keep track of all the people who have signed it.
Great, Peter. Thank you. Daniel Glover, thank you for being patient, and I love your sign. It's a very good message on being ignored by too many.
Yes, no. That's a good one. Peter, what Peter's doing, I would like to get involved with what you're doing, Peter. Well, you may remember me from the Archangel Committee a few years ago. Yes, sir. Okay, I'm working on what is just adding to sort of solution kind of language. International Day of Peace, if you've not heard of it, it's been around since 1984. It's by the United Nations. And the basic bottom line to the International Day of Peace is that it's a notion to whomever is involved in the Day of Peace educate themselves about how to grow peace, and they offer programs to the communities, to schools and whatever, that are available online and available for free. And so Westbrook has just Mayor Foley just signed a resolution on Monday, the 11th, and so Westbrook is going to celebrate the 21st as International Peace Day, but we're going to start working. I've already talked to the superintendent of schools, work on incorporating some of these programs into the community somehow. But that's all to be found out. But it's if you go and look up International Day of Peace, you will find a lot of information about how to get involved with discussions to create peace. And that's what it's all about, I think. And if we can get those mechanisms, and what this day is that whomever's involved in it, a country, they have to be a ceasefire. The only thing you have to do is for 1 minute, be silent at noon on the 21st of September. And every time zone in the world will be doing the same thing, creating a wave of peace. So understanding being involved with the International Day of Peace, you're joining hundreds of millions of people that are already aware of the idea and are doing something in their local communities to do something. So everybody can be doing something about creating peace. And that's what I would add to the conversation.
Thank you, Daniel. Just one quick question. We actually had made some preliminary contacts with the Westbrook City Council about Back from the Brink, that resolution, trying to get them to consider it. And the mayor, Mayor Foley, was not very receptive to that. Are you a Westbrook resident?
Yes, I am. And I know Michael.
I would love to be able to
about it, but it's
communicate with you more about that, because I think we have an opportunity there to follow up on her peace resolution to try to encourage her to consider doing Back from the Brink. But
you mean
we can do that offline.
Mayor Foley, Michael Foley, he's a guy.
Michael Foley, sorry, right. Who's the Armenian woman? The woman of Armenian heritage?
He's the president of the council.
Oh, the council. Okay.
President of the council.
All right. Good. All right.
Mayor.
If you could put your email in the chat, I'd love to be in further contact with you about that. Thank you. Doug Rawlings, thank you for your patience, please.
That comes with gray hair. I just wanted to tell John that rather than share his reference in the chat room. I just want to mention, I refer back to Kathy mentioned the VFP Peace Boat, which is the Golden Rule, which I've talked about before. But I just want to mention that it's finished its tour of the east and west coast and the Mississippi River and up and down the Great Lakes and all this stuff. It's in Chicago and it's completing its year. But there's a wonderful film about it. It's a 30-minute film called Making Waves. And I think it would be an excellent thing to show in a community or in a school. It's the whole purpose of the Golden Rule is to act as an educational tool about nuclear weapons. So they talk about that, and more than likely, Helen Jacquard, the director of the program, would be available via Zoom probably to join a conversation. So if you are so inclined and you're in a community or have access to a school and you want to show a great movie, I'd be glad to help you do that. So the Golden Rule, it's an excellent story. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, John Raby, please.
Yeah, I'm going to butt in again with a suggestion for Daniel. I used to live in Westbrook myself. And as it turns out, I lived in the same apartment building on 16 Blue Spruce Farm Road as State Rep Morgan Riley, who's 27 and extremely well informed. I don't know whether you know Morgan yourself.
I know him and his father, yes.
Oh, okay. He may be of some help.
He might. I haven't talked to him lately, but I haven't talked to many of the state reps at all, so.
Okay. Well, I've already written about the letter urging the Biden administration to send an observer delegation to New York. So fingers crossed.
I wish you luck. It's not easy.
No.
Great, thank you, John. Other comments or anybody else want to add on to some of these great suggestions we've had already? Encouraging comments. Okay, there's the link to Golden Rule in the chat, and that's great. I'd be interested to have people's reaction to whether this anti-nuclear effort should include more to do with the victims of radiation. I know the RICA Radiation Survivors Act is being negotiated in Congress. Two different versions of it were passed in the House and the Senate. Any comments about that? That certainly is a direct link to Midori's presentation and as well as the film. Anybody have any information or comments about RICA?
I can say something real quick.
Okay, Midori.
So I mentioned in my talk that I was in Japan this past August. A big thing that was talked about throughout the conference was how a lot of the hibakusha are about to die off. They're in the youngest is on average like late 80s. But what the people of Japan have been trying to push is that personal testimony and the sharing of their stories is what can push forward, continue to push forward this, the peace movement and keeping the conversation of truly what happened to the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because they don't want to be forgotten. And there's generations after. There's me, and then there's second generation, and there's third generation. And we are getting to a point where the second generation of hibakusha are starting to have to get their health tested. And it's still very, very real for the descendants of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so I truly think that the path forward to getting people to talk about, because some people see it's a political issue and some people just don't want to talk about politics. And I think that personal testimony is a way to show that, yes, you need to care about politics, because it's about people and it's about the humanity of people who died. And I think that, especially for me as a young person who's trying to get people my age to care, when they've been taught their whole lives that they just shouldn't have to care and that they don't, I think that maybe there's just a way of personal testimony can start those conversations. And I personally have found that that's how I get people to listen to me, because I can speak on nuclear disarmament, but if I start with personal testimony, then I can get into the conversation of politics and what we can do and the treaty and all of these other things that maybe they don't want to listen to right off the bat. So, yeah.
Midori, thank you for that. Your words and your art all are so important in that. And I can only say thank you. Kathy Burgoyne, Dr. Burgoyne.
Yes, even though they didn't show any survivors of Hiroshima in the movie of Oppenheimer, that was a very powerful part of the movie for me, and I actually cried thinking of those 200,000 people that died. And I'm hoping that younger people watching the movie, that affected them too. It would be more powerful, of course, if they had actually shown the survivors or, gone into that more. But I think that I'm glad that the movie is here, and I'm hoping it will affect younger generations.
Thank you, Kathy, and that's your emotion is very evident and heartfelt. Thank you. Peter Wilk.
Unmuting. One further thought triggered by the several references to younger folk who really we need them to be engaged in this issue. And the film has many flaws, but it is an opportunity for conversation, and it may be topical enough that some sort of curriculum could be developed. It's beyond my purview to think about doing it, but there used to be a sister organization to PSR called ESR, Educators for Social Responsibility. And they tended to try to do this, to develop curricula that schools could take advantage of, so that a social studies class, political science class, civics class, health class could think about, could view the movie and then have a discussion about it in a much more constructive way, I would hope, than was done, Midori, in your class, in terms of what the real consequences are of living in the nuclear age then and now. So something for folks to think about if you have any connections to high schools.
Great thought, Peter. Lonnie, you had your hand up but took it down. Do you want to say something? No, she's passing. Okay. Erica Frank, Dr. Frank, please.
Yeah, just to make sure that you saw in the chat, if that's of interest, Peter would be glad to put in a module about that in both of those courses. Could be a useful way, because just for you to know, nextgenu.org is now being used in every country in the world. So, and we have a full ladder by the beginning of next year from first grade to PhD in the health sciences. So it becomes part of an ecosystem of health scientists and health practitioners promoting this as part of what we do ordinarily, right? So glad to talk about that more offline.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful. I didn't know of that, actually, to my shame, I guess. Well, we're nearing the end of the hour we had set aside. I'm happy to stay on as long as anybody has the need to or wants to continue this discussion. If people, I will just make sure you all have my email. I'll put it in there right now. And if you don't, you have things to share and you want to share that, please contact me and I'll try to get it distributed. I think through your registration, I have all your emails. So thank you one and all. And any final comments?
I believe there was one question from Marge.
Oh, okay, good.
John, about how those chapters, those youth chapters had gotten started. You had mentioned in an earlier comment, John.
Can I make another comment?
Please do.
I was 14 years old when the bomb fell. I always wondered why nobody cried. I was going to make another comment. It just, when I went to the anti-nuclear war march in New York in 1982, there were many buses from all over the country. It was just an incredible gathering. But today the peace movement has died. If we're going to talk about going to New York or Washington, we need buses loads of people. We've forgotten about creating peace and activating. Buses were organized here in Maine to go to that 1982 anti-nuclear march. And where are they today?
How true. Larry Gilbert, please.
Yes, Robert Shetterly, who has painted some 270 Americans who tell the truth, has talked about you know, in schools, we teach history and we teach about this war and that war and all these wars, but we don't teach peace. And if we could work on getting the departments of education to develop a course for various levels in school to teach peace, so that we get a generation that will be, more inclined to know more about peace and what it can do, you know. So I just offer that up.
Very good. Thank you. Larry's a personal friend of Dr. Bernard Lown, the late Dr. Bernard Lown. And it was my honor to make a presentation in his memory a year ago, last summer. Thank you, Larry, for being here. Midori, you have another comment.
Yes. So going off of that, I got to speak with the peace messengers in Japan, which is from anywhere from 13-year-olds all the way up through 18. They're all high school students. And in Japan, they get peace classes pretty much from the time they're around middle school all the way through high school. And there's in different prefectures in different parts of the country, it varies on what level they're taught about peace. But something that I realized was like they're teaching their youth about peace. And it showed because the peace messengers, who I'm sure everyone's seen, one, are amazing. They are so young and they are so well spoken and they're just amazing people. But they really, really care. And it came with being just taught the truth when they were young. And I personally don't know how we can get it into schools, but I know that for me, it was really, really difficult to go through history class and to be taught just completely the opposite of everything that I believed and everything that my grandmother had taught me and that my father had taught me. And I truly, truly believe that if we get it into schools and we get like peace education for young children, and maybe it's not in schools right now, maybe we can't get to that point, but like the education of children, like they could be like the peace messengers, and they're just amazing people who I'm pretty sure will be in New York in November. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. I will have to learn more about them. Doug Rawlings, please.
Very quickly, I taught a course in peace studies at the University of Maine in Farmington for 6 or 7 years for first-year students. But the book that I used was A History of Nonviolence in America, compiled by Alice and Staunton Lind. It's an excellent resource, and the students were fascinated by this whole nature. You know, and I've said this before, I love to say it, you know, my opening gambit in first class would say, okay, how far did you get in history? And everybody made reference to, we got through World War II, we got through the Korean War. I said, wait a minute, do you think there's another way of looking at history besides looking at through the lens of war? They had never thought about that. So let's take a look at it through nonviolent direct action, which is what the Staunton and Alice Lind book deals with. So it's a wonderful resource. I honestly think, and I don't think I'm deluding myself, that the students were fascinated by a lot of this stuff. They had never heard of these things at all. They knew about Martin Luther King Jr.'s, you know, I Have a Dream speech, but they didn't know about his letter from the Birmingham jail or his, you know, comments about the Vietnam War and stuff like that. That was sort of skimmed over in their history, if even looked at all. So anyways, there is a path to that. Orono had a course in peace studies as well, so I think it's out there. We can resurrect it, perhaps.
Great. Hopefully that is the case. Any other final comments before we close out the hour? Larry, yes, I see you want to say something.
Yeah, just one more thing. I've law enforcement was my career, and you know, for example, a murder case where a young person committed a murder, and the parents were crying and saying, we did everything for them. We did everything for them. And I have this saying that I tell my kids, it starts in the crib. Okay. So it has to start with young people when they're in school in the lower grades and they come up that way. So it does start in the crib. Midori, I met her this summer. She was terrific. I showed my grandkids your artwork also.
Really? Oh, thank you. It's all on my website, which I think will be put in the chat. But thank you so much. That means so much.
And Kathy Burgoyne. Thank you, Midori.
I just wanted to mention, since I've got the University of Maine behind me, that we do have up here a peace studies program. It's called Peace and Reconciliation Studies. And I think it's a master's. And I'm sending the link to you right now in the chat. Of course, that's for college students, not for under that, but still.
Thank you, Kathy. That's good to know that that exists. Okay. I think we may have successfully ended the hour. And thank you all for your participation. It was an honor to be with you all. I know the collective effort that's gone into peace work represented by the 22 people that are on this call is something to be celebrated. And I thank you all for that. And thank you for your participation. Again, don't hesitate to contact me if you have any further questions. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Doug.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.